it says district slash SELPA may, in its discretion, refuse not to fund an independent evaluation. It also says, the last sentence, likewise, the district slash SELPA may, in its discretion, refuse to fund services for an individual or agency who has conducted an independent educational evaluation for a particular student. Now, these words are important because if you adopt this, you are essentially giving the SELPA staff and your own staff discretion that they don't have. They do not have the discretion to override congressional law. They do not have, this is an abuse of discretion. Specifically, and this is code word, for a particular student. I made comments at the CAC meeting stating that that particular student was my daughter. This is code word for we're going to retaliate against parents that advocate and that we consider to be a thorn in our side, and we're going to take it out on their kids for a particular student. Now, you can leave it in and we'll challenge it. We'll let the feds know that you're trying to override their authority by giving the SELPA this ultimate authority and discretion that it does not have under the law. This is an abuse of authority, and this sets up your staff to be arbitrary and capricious for a particular student. That's what it says. The limits, that's very questionable because that basically sets it up for certain assessors to be able to assess. And you can't mandate the private rate for independent evaluators. So this is trying to limit parents from getting an evaluation independently. This is trying to position SELPA to pick the evaluators themselves or to place barriers for those evaluators that they don't like. Thank you.
Mr. Palmer?
I just asked for clarification. This is the one that I had.
Mr. Palmer, I have approved that you can speak to transfer agreement, behavior intervention, IEE, at a limit of 3 minutes each.
Okay,
as long as we don't go over the 20 minutes for the whole topic.
All right, can Ms. Johnson please start my time now?
Thank you.
The first that I'd like to give comment on is the item regarding the transfer agreement. In this transfer agreement, you're adding in the new Open Enrollment Act policy, and which I appreciate that. I've spoken about the Open Enrollment Act in this meeting previously a few years ago. My child is on a transfer under the Open Enrollment Act from Central School District when Central Elementary was one of the bottom 1,000 schools in the state. I got out with my child who was entering kindergarten, didn't want them to be in the bottom school, and I fortunately was received into attendance at Great Plain Elementary in Etiwanda School District, so I was thankful for that. But at that time I found out that Etiwanda decides that they don't like the Open Enrollment Act, and so even though the transfer request clearly says Open Enrollment Act, and even though Central School District released him because they're mandated to, they have no choice because of the Open Enrollment Act, Etiwanda School District says, well, we've accepted him under this new thing, or they just want to call it space available. Well, I don't see any act called Space Available. It is the Open Enrollment Act. I've consulted with Senator Romero, who authored the Open Enrollment Act. I've talked with her about it. I've also met with Senator Mike Morrell and made him aware, his office, of this egregious actions by Etiwanda School District. And I've also reached out to Assemblyman Mark Steinorth in regards to this to help educate them on the lack of really following the Open Enrollment Act as they're supposed to. So I think, again, these are just the little tricks that they do. And I brought that to the attention because at the time, my child was not a special education student, and I hoped that he wouldn't because I was hoping those days were ending for me. But as it turns out, that student now does have some special education needs. And my concern in it not being under the Open Enrollment Act is that they would just be able to retaliate against my child and kick my child out. And so I put forth those issues because I don't want my son to be retaliated against. And so that ends my comments on the issue of transferring.
Thank you.
We need to have clarity on Open Enrollment Act and how it's adhered to. You want to start my time again? This is on the behavior interventions. I don't know if you know or not, I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I understand mandated reporting clearly. I deal with mandated reporting all of the time. I was the clinical director for 17 years at a home for abused and neglected children. I believe that most of you in this room are mandated reporters in the role that you play. And you now have been presented first-hand knowledge of suspicion of abuse. I believe, as mandated reporters, you have 24 hours to go pick up that phone and report the suspicion of abuse. So I want to just make you aware that you have culpability in this now because the mother has shown you a picture, the mother has claimed that abuse happened. You now have personal culpability as a mandated reporter. It's not just Mr. Royal Lord who sat and did nothing in the IEP. It's not just the other people. Mandated reporting is an individual issue. You have individual culpability because you have been presented first-hand knowledge, not suspicion, not third-party, first-hand knowledge from the parent with a picture. So I would suggest that you get clarity on your requirements under mandated reporting. But also under behavior interventions, I'm really concerned the language here, and again, part of my responsibilities as a clinical director was to oversee behavioral interventions that were done with emotionally disturbed children. And I'm really concerned with the language here. Your language is very vague. It leaves it open. I mean, who approves these interventions that are utilized? I see that it's referring it to the IEP team, but what professional or what person that has expertise in behavior intervention is on that team? I don't see, there could be, but they have serious responsibilities here. I'm also concerned that there's the only things that are referenced are ed codes. Well, ed codes don't deal with the types of interventions. The ed code doesn't train people. The ed code doesn't give you a specific intervention to use. So it needs to be more clear. And one thing I'm particularly concerned about is the use. It says in there you can verbally and physically redirect. Physically redirect involves touch. When you touch a child, you have the potential to seriously escalate the situation. Again, as a clinical director, I had to train my staff in understanding when is touch appropriate, when should touch be avoided. Because as soon as you lay your hand on a child, you have the potential to seriously escalate that intervention. And so I see nothing in the language here that helps the staff discern when physical redirection, touch, can be used, and when touch should be avoided. And if you're dealing particularly with children who maybe have PTSD, this is really serious. So you need to really understand that and get some language in here that addresses this issue. That's my comments for behavior interventions. And then my last comments have to do with the emergency interventions. I'm really concerned here again, we use vague language that I believe jeopardizes the safety of our students. In particular, I'll just point out the word prolonged. Like it says, emergency interventions cannot be prolonged. Well, what does prolonged mean? Are we talking about duration of time? Like, oh, this intervention lasted for 20 minutes, that's prolonged? Are we talking about the number of incidents? This child had 5 incidents. One of them was just this little thing that lasted 2 seconds. One was this incident that lasted 2 minutes. One was this incident that lasted 20 minutes. What does prolonged mean? This is vague, and it leaves it up to a wide array of interpretation. Are we talking about the frequency? Oh, we had something happen today, we had it happen 3 times today. So what does prolonged mean? It's too vague, it leaves it open for wide interpretation, and we're talking about emergency interventions that include, I'm assuming, some kind of physical intervention, and that's very serious. The other thing I'm concerned about is, it says you can't use sprays in their face. So my question is, well, can you use it somewhere else on their body? I mean, can you spray it in their general direction and then they do it? I mean, are we going to use sprays or not? I don't understand why we would ever use sprays. So why do we have to delineate in the face? Because if we're allowing it, we're allowing it. If we're not, we're not. So I'm a little confused on that. I think that needs some clarity. The other thing is this idea of use of force. When it comes to use of force, again, my experience in working with children, some children as young as 3 years old, I'm a big man. I'm 6'2", I'm 260 pounds. How in here is there a language different? How is there a differential for the issue of size? You know, when I have to go and I'm called in to deal with a 3-year-old, I have to have an understanding and training as to my use of force. I'm going to have use of force is going to be proportional to my size. Some teachers are obese. If they're dealing with, you know, kindergartners, first graders, and, you know, they have their size is, you know, so we need to delineate what we mean by use of force here, because how I use force and how, you know, someone who is more diminutive, like Miss Lou here, more petite, you know, our use of force, if I exert the same force as her, my force is greater because I'm bigger and I weigh more and I'm taller. So there's no language in here that takes into account that kind of issue where, you know, use of force can be impacted by physical size. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Monica.
Tamayo. I just want to pass by and show you guys a picture, and that's it.
Okay, thank you. All right, now we can move on to.
I'm sorry, I didn't speak on IEEs. That's what my third one was. And I don't think I've used my whole 20 minutes.
No, it's 20 minutes for all.
There's 3 minutes, we've got 8 speakers.
So that's 24 minutes. We've already extended our 20-minute period. Okay, E1.
Okay, I would like to walk you briefly through what we have here in the packet. As I put in the background, you had a version last time, and then there was a request from Nancy Kelly to have the red line version, which I sent out to all of you subsequent to the meeting and sent it to all governance committees. Then we had a meeting with PAC, which was, oh, I'm sorry. PAC had their second reading of all the documents, and as you look through, if there's a gray box with red writing at the top, it's telling you that there were additional comments that PAC had made. For example, on AR 430.5 on page 2, you'll see that we changed and put a period in between and started another sentence. So it reads, the LEA of residents maintains the responsibility for the offer of faith, period, the LEA of attendance assumes, and it goes on. So those are the only minor changes that were made since you last saw these. This will conclude the whole set, all 25 BPs and ARs, and if you approve them as they are in their final version, I have a binder ready to go out electronically to all of the committees this afternoon, and they will all have the whole set, so you'll have that as a tool. So I think we're ready for a motion.
All right, can I get a motion on the policies and procedures?
There's 4 board policies and ARs,
And E1.
and there was one item in one.
Do I have a second on that? Second. Any discussion?
I have a question. Have the policies all been reviewed by legal counsel to make sure they're compliant with the laws and regulations?
These 4 were done in tandem with legal.
The question was, I'm going to repeat that, was,
Dr. Judson asked if there had been legal review, and yes, these 4 were developed in conjunction with legal assistance.
any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion passes. All right, E2. Mr. Palmer, E2, interim local plan.
Yes, in this, within the local plan, it has a section, it speaks, I think it's section E as well, but it speaks to literacy. And my concern is that any program, any literacy program that I've been offered for either of my students who have dyslexia, when I check on What Works Clearinghouse, which is the federal government's webpage that tells you what works, what doesn't work. They're all listed as they don't work for dyslexic students. So my concern is that you have this literacy thing in here, but everything you're offering doesn't work for dyslexics. I mean, we know what works. There's like 4 programs that the International Dyslexia Association recommends that do work, and I've never been offered any of those 4 programs. I've only received those through litigation with the school district. And I believe IEEs are also a part of the local plan, so if I could just interject my comment there within this 3 minutes. My concern there that you just approved was that the idea of limitations, which Ms. Lou previously brought up, I agree with that. I'm also concerned this policy does not address when the district fails to assess in all areas of suspected disability. So the policy, and that's how I prevail with the CDE complaint, because the school district did not assess in all areas of unique need that were presented to the school prior. And so even though Ms. Bobbitt and the WSELPA told the school district, no, you don't have to do the IEE, there was a CDE complaint filed, and I prevailed, and I got the IEE. So you're putting in policies that aren't going to hold up. You're just going to waste time and waste money. So you just voted in a policy that doesn't work. Also, in the policy, it talked about observing a student in an appropriate setting, and that's being interpreted by Etiwanda School District. Observing a student in an appropriate setting is all it says. But that's being interpreted by Etiwanda School District as that it must be in the school, and the school must be able to give input on an IEE. Well, that's like an egregious overreach to say that being in an appropriate setting means that it must be in the school and that it must be including school input. I'm also concerned about the conflict of interest that's in there. I think it's arbitrarily applied, and it favors agencies that are on the list. So, that's a concern of mine. Also, appropriate copies that Ms. Kelly had asked for were not made available to the public at the CAC meeting.
This is being brought forward for a second read. The CDE has confirmed that if we approve the local plan, which you all approved unanimously on April 21, 2014, they will count it as an interim plan for 1 more year. We'll have till June 30th of 2017, and then we will be focusing on the reorg and working very directly with OMSD, which we started this week and had a very successful reorganization meeting. So I would ask you to approve this so it will serve as our local plan for yet 1 more year.
Brand, I had put in a card for each, but I consolidated, I put them all in one.
Come on up, Ms. Lou, sorry, and I'll look for it. I think you did.
Yeah, I thought, in the spirit of the Paperwork Reduction Act. Thank you. I didn't want to waste another piece of paper. Thank you. Regarding the local plan IEE policy, it states that the parents' disagreement with the school district must be in writing. That is contrary to law. What the law says is the parent can either disagree in writing or present the concerns at an IEP meeting. So this is really bypassing the IEP meeting and basically putting it out there that it's a sham, because basically it doesn't do any good to bring up issues at IEP meetings when you still have to put it in writing. So this is very problematic. Regarding the literacy policy on page 30, there are well-known interventions for literacy, such as Linda Mood-Bell. But those programs that are effective and that work, it seems like at the CELPA, the only way a parent can get them is through the due process system. I don't understand why so much money is being spent on the due process system and on litigation when these programs could be made available. And in some districts, like OMSD, they are made available at IEP meetings. But it's come to a point that the IEP process is a sham because it's being booby-trapped by the West End SELPA policies. And, you know, you already know the programs that work. If you really want to make it work, implement those programs, train your people.